Good afternoon and welcome. My name's John Cholikoff. I'm the Associate Dean at the School of Management. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today. First, I'll introduce our moderator, Professor Christine McCormick, and then our special guest, Mr. Jeffrey Swartz. So Kristen McCormick is the faculty director of our profit and nonprofit, public and nonprofit management program. She's the real deal. She has 25 years experience managing and leading nonprofit organizations. She was the founding executive director of the Boston Food Bank and a founder of the Neighborhood House Charter School, one of the first charter schools in Boston. She teaches global sustainability and social entrepreneurship and leads the Brazilian Field Seminar for MBA students. So any graduate students here, there's this wonderful seminar, it takes place in January. You go to Brazil, sit on the beach, and do some great things. So a really pleasure to have Kristen to moderate today. Now for our special guest, it's really an honor to introduce Mr. Jeffrey Swartz, who's the president and CEO of Timberland. Jeffrey got his undergraduate, his BA in comparative literature from Brown University. Not bad. And his MBA from Dartmouth, actually a very good pedigree. Jeff is the third generation of the Swartz family to leave Timberland. He was promoted actually to CEO and president in 1998 after holding various positions. In other words, he worked his way up to the company, through the company, didn't just get it handed to him. Under his leadership, they have had tremendous and rapid growth. They've gone from $156 million in 1989 to $1.4 billion in 2008. And in 1988, Timberland launched a groundbreaking private-public partnership with City Year. Now, City Year is a national youth service organization. As a national founder-sponsor, Timberland is invested to fuel City Year's growth and its impact. And you should join this because they serve as the official outfitter. In Jeff's own, he initiated what they call the Path of Service program, and that was done in 1992. This program gives all employees 40 hours a year off to work in nonprofit and community service type of endeavors. Service sabbaticals, which provide up to 6 months of paid leave for employees to serve into capacity-building roles in social justice organizations, are the latest evolution of the Path of Service program. Now, for the last 10 years, or for 10 consecutive years, Timberland has been on the Fortune magazine's 100 best companies, right? It has also been named one of the best places to work by Working Mothers magazine. They have been listed on Business Ethics list of 100 best corporate citizens, and in 2002, Timberland received the Ron Brown Award. Everybody knows what that is. It's a presidential award recognizing outstanding corporate leadership in social responsibility. So I give you Kristen and Jeffrey.
Quick show of hands. How many are graduate students? Undergraduate students? Friends and fans of Timberland and Jeff? That would be everybody. Now you're all supposed to raise your hands.
Nice job. That was really good. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to get right into the hard stuff today. Looking around the audience, I see a lot of you, whether you're undergraduates, graduates, who are people who care about sustainability, who know something about sustainability business models, and Timberland is a leader in this area. Jeff specifically says, I want to get into the hard stuff. I want to ask the hard questions, and I think this is a good group to do that. Before we get into it, we're going to do questions, have a conversation for about 20 minutes or so. You can Twitter in questions. We have a Twitter feed set up, which is BUSMG_news. So if you want to Twitter questions, we've got somebody taking them. They'll be handing them to me. Also, when we pause, we're going to, if you don't Twitter, if you don't want to do that, you can use the microphones. So be thinking about your questions. So let's start with Timberland. Let's start with the hard stuff. You have been in this business for many years. Timberland was on the forefront. You were at the beginning of this movement around sustainability. But when I think of leather, Greenpeace just had something on their website about deforestation and leather being the biggest problem in the Amazon rainforest. So how do you equate those? Talk to us about that.
So it's you just telescoped about 25 years worth of learning into one question, because you're right that when we began a conversation about sustainability, we didn't call it sustainability because that language didn't exist, at least in our lexicon. We were frugal, thoughtful, outdoors-oriented company brand, and so sort of the waste not, want not, New England, sort of stony soil, be thoughtful. My grandfather was a real entrepreneur. He went bust twice, walked through the shoe factory with my grandfather, and he's picking scrap up off the floor, and that wasn't about melting polar ice caps or Al Gore doing the Macarena. That was about we can't afford to waste that, right? So there is an ethic of thoughtfulness that comes from being. It would be good to feed our children, right? It's really simple in that regard. As our brand becomes more of a brand and it makes its way out into the world and starts to have conversation with consumers, it turns out that the outdoors, which is an important place for us as a brand, it becomes kind of natural, relatively easy. In the late 80s, I was on the board of the Wilderness Society. Wilderness Society is a spectacular group of very sophisticated people, at least they were then. And I was the l'enfant terrible. I was like a corporate guy, but it was okay because we were trying to do the right thing. We were writing checks, and we were nodding seriously when they talked about environmental problems, and that felt terrible. It really did. And so it was in Washington, and it was very grandiose. And it turned out that was the education continues. It turns out that that's a good form of advocacy and a broad form for legislation. Didn't feel action-oriented enough, didn't feel kind of like get your hands on the throat of things. And so speed up, right? Speed up, we decide that we need to actually learn about this notion of sustainability because it ties to how we run our business, it ties to where we run our business, and it really ties to who we are and what we believe. And that's a really nice cocktail, right? So there's passion and there's professional thinking, and they come together in a neat way, and you think, okay, here we go. About 6 weeks ago, I got a note from some of my closest friends around the world. I got about 65,000 emails in about 4 days in 4 or 5 different languages. It was the exact same note, clipped and pasted in 4 or 5 languages. It said, "You corporate scumbag, you're buying leather from a company that is processing leather bought from a cattle rancher who's located in Brazil. You are deforesting the Amazon." And I thought, we are? And they didn't, we're asking for a response. Some of the letters ended with, please drop dead. Most of the letters were even harsher, like dropping dead was a good alternative, because most of the letters were, if you don't prove the negative, that you're not doing this, we will never do business with you again, we will scorch the earth. Love, your friends at Greenpeace. We had one of those, unscheduled conversations in corporate heaven where like, what the hell is going on? And so I had the supply chain team in the room because we have environmental standards, not in terms of how we purchase, right? And so we've been diligent for the last 5 years trying to shift the fundamental problem that exists with leather. There's nothing that you can say about carbon emission you can't say no carbon emission and leather in the same sentence. They can't go together. And it's not, but, right, what we've been doing is working backwards. We started with, let's talk about our factory where we manufacture. Let's make sure that working conditions are safe. Let's make sure that the environmental effluents are controlled. Let's make sure we're doing the thoughtful things. Eliminate toxins, terrific. Then you move back into the tanneries. Anybody here ever been in a tannery? Excellent judgment. Look across cultures through the history of time, right? Look in Japanese culture, look in, if you look back to ancient biblical times, tanning leather is not mom doesn't want her babies to grow up to be leather tanners. It's a dirty, dangerous, low-caste, terrible business because you take chemicals and you take an organic thing and you turn it into something that's actually kind of cool and sexy when it sits in your foot. But you don't want to hear about the process because it's really horrible. Okay, but we move back into the tanneries. We talked about renewable energy. We talked about use of chemicals. We talked about no heavy metals. Heavy metals is a classic ingredient to making leather, right? From the earliest days, anybody wore a pair of Bass Weejuns back in the old days. Horween Tanneries, located in the south side of Chicago to this day. Good people. They are good people. I know them very well. But they're using heavy metal to tan the leather. You pour on heavy metal. Works like a charm, but then what do you do with the effluent? It goes into the water supply and people die. So this is America, and they pass laws that say you can't do that, and so they control it. We're working our way back. Greenpeace guy said, prove that you know where the hide comes from. And our answer was, well, it came from a cow. And they said, no, can you trace that hide to that cow? We said, no, this is not the pharmaceutical industry. We don't have traceability in the supply chain. And they said, shame on you, slugger. And so we sat around as a team and said, anybody have traceability back to the cow? Can you tell me where that cow was munching grass? The answer is no, we can't. Now, because we are who we are, we sat down with the supplier and with Greenpeace and said, we can't now, but we commit that we will. And to their credit, Greenpeace said, this is exactly what we expected from you, that you'd commit to do it. So here's the good news. We have learned from this encounter about the notion of traceability. Still doesn't address the issue. The single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our value chain, depending how you want to calculate it, but here's the broadest sweep, is a tough one. Gary Hirschberg's the founder of Stonyfield Yogurt. He's a good guy. And Gary says to me, he's also a New Hampshire guy, he says to me, we got to fix this carbon emission thing. I said, okay, we're working on it. Employee travel in the buildings and all this. So he says, look, it's all about cows. And I said, what do you got? And he said, you have a cow, you have the grass, you have an interaction between the cow and the grass. The cow eats the grass, the cow processes the grass. There's this biological explosion called methane, and that is the source, that's the largest source of carbon emission in the timberland value chain. Cows, flatulence, okay, I don't know how else to describe it, right? So, okay, this is BU, so you guys are sophisticated. We're talking about cows in the field. That's the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our value chain. And we have absolutely no influence over that, right? But you don't care anyways. Actually, it turns out you do care. And you don't care that I don't know how to have influence on that. You want to hold me accountable for it, even though, what do I have to do with animal husbandry? I have nothing to do with it. No one's raising cows for leather. No one, never. Raising cows for meat. So what am I supposed to do? And so I talked about my grandfather picking up bobbins on the floor. If he saw me sitting at a table with the Darth Vader of our industry, Nike, or with Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a good guy, right? So all the bad guys, there's Adidas guys and the Nike guys, these are cut your throat in the marketplace, honest cut your throat, not I don't say they're evil, they are evil, they're nasty. They're our competitors. And we have to sit at the table and hold this like me hanging out with you with the Los Angeles Dodgers hat on. That's just beyond the pale, right? It's not gonna last. You wait and see what Manny does. But anyways, we have to sit, if you really do care about the notion of leather and its impact on the environmental outcomes of your brand, you can push as hard as you want at Horween, hard as you want at Prime Leather. We do, right? Use your purchasing power. But until the industry sits down and has this really nasty dance of competitors collaborating to create social change, can't influence the outcome. Now, what's the asymptote of that? Can we get to the point where there will be no carbon emissions related? No, the answer is absolutely not. So we have a group of people working at Timberland at something called Better Than Leather. Now, you remember when, who was it that introduced that?
Before you go on to that, I want to come back to that because you said something really important. You can do a lot of things around your supply chain as an individual company, but big sea changes, big kind of game changers really involves everybody sitting at the table. And I want to segue into the climate change conference that's coming up next year, and because there are multiple stakeholders involved in that, and how, as a business leader, what hope do you have for that? What's the role of business? And if you are a business leader, how do you pull in your competitors? How do you engage with government? How do you engage in the media? And is the climate change conference an opportunity to do that?
So one part of that answer is easy. How do you engage your competitors? The thing that's different about a CEO than any other leader that I know about in civic society, careful to say that I know about, is there's a different form of accountability to the CEO. I listened to the incredible demonization of the CEO, and it's cheap. It's cheap, but it's convenient, and so the politicians and the rest have a great time at it. Most of the CEOs that I know aren't venal. Most of the CEOs I know are just flawed. They're just human, and yet they live in a system of really sharp accountability. And so I can get Mark Parker on the phone. Mark's the CEO of Nike, and I know Mark not at all. Mark's not a friend. He never will be. He's an arch competitor. His job is to crush me, and mine, as David his Goliath, is to kick him so hard in the knee he'll fall over. And so no quarter at all ever in terms of how we do business. So no collusion. But I get my 45 seconds, or he gets his with me, to say, look, I don't like you. I don't like your brand, and I don't like your mother either, comma. But we do share in common a desire to have an impact within our industry on packaging standards, right? And so, because with Timberland,
why does Nike have that? We know why you have that.
Why do
we
they
know the history.
Well, the good news is I can't speak to the next man's motivation with insight. I can tell you, I know the activist crowd at Nike a long time. So not the executive team, but the activist crowd. The activist crowd is relatively fungible, meaning if you're a Nike environmental activist, you could be a Timberland environmental activist. You would dress differently, but you wouldn't act differently. There's an underclass of activists in our industry. So the people at Patagonia, they have a style, but their substance and their pedigree and their background is very familiar one to the next. They know each other. And by the way, they're very adroit politicians, because many times they're working with less than 100% sponsorship at the executive level. So they find ways to sort of navigate. But how do you get the competitor to collaborate? There is an accountability mechanism that's just different. There's a language. It doesn't exist in other places in the civic square, the best I've been able to either find or articulate. And that's why I am desperately hopeful and mildly despairing about whether or not the civic square in Copenhagen or any other place will be architected, if that was a verb, in a sufficient fashion to include the voices that need to be there. The fact of the matter is, you know how many CEOs are invited to Copenhagen? As far as I know, none. And to me is an abject failure of thinking. It's a pompous, government-centric model of social change, which we have 1,000 years of data that says doesn't work. And it's not a partisan point. It's not more government or less government. It's just there's no solution that we can posit in social change that's only government or only the church. And so if we really are serious about creating three-dimensional social change, we're just going to have to, change the country club rules. There's going to have to be a way for the private sector to be in the conversation, because there's things that we can do better than they, whoever they are. By the way, just like
Are there examples? Are there examples where, in small scale or large scale, where you've been able to come together with your competitors, with government, with the activists, and made a change?
Human rights. We know. I'm going to talk affirmatively about Nike. Even in the worst days, when they were doing things that they're not proud of, they were complying with local law. So try be the CEO. Which local law you want to pay attention to? I was in London the other day, I gave a speech. It was brilliant, really good. Yeah, it's hard in Britain because they got that accent thing going for them. So I was speaking American, but I did the best I could. And the guy up after me was the CEO of IKEA. Very well-dressed guy, nailed it. And what did he talk about? Exactly this point. He said, we make furniture, check. Sell it all over the world, got it? He said, but not in Japan. Oh, he said, well, so big insight, we're gonna sell furniture in Japan, but there's a standard about outgassing. I can talk about cow farts, he's talking about outgassing of furniture, right? So you put, I don't know what it means, but gases come out of the thing, right? And so there's a formaldehyde, parts per million, trillion, or billion, whatever it is, and the standards. He's Swedish, right? And so in Sweden they have a standard that says 30 parts per trillion. In Japan, the standard is like 1 part per trillion. It's the highest standard they've encountered anywhere in the world. And so he told his engineers, let's figure out whether we can or can't reach that standard, because obviously if you don't comply with local law, you can't sell their furniture. So he figured out how to do it. It was more expensive, naturally, to achieve the higher standard. Then he tasked his team and he said, I'll tell you what, let's achieve that standard for all that we do. Now, France doesn't require it. France's standard is much laxer than Japan's. It's not, I guess it's not unsafe, but it's much laxer. He said, no, we're going to set ourselves up from a faith perspective that someday these hodgepodge of local constituencies will create a global standard. And when we do, it'll be a competitive advantage for our brand, because we'll have figured out how to manufacture at 1 part per trillion rather than 30, where our competitors won't. Do you know how many different local labor law standards we face in the manufacture of a pair of boots around the world? Every constituency we do business in is different. And so what does business do better than? In a funny way, I think the United Nations is the greatest ideal and the deepest failure at the same time of any institution we've ever created. And so if you look at a standard for human rights, you'd think a global compact, which it doesn't say very much, right? Everybody can salute. By the way, not everybody does, which I don't get. But anyways, the standard doesn't ask for much. So the fact that companies like ours, not just ours, but Nike as an example, says, we're going to take a view. I don't want the job of being the United Nations, but since they won't do their job, either the passionate individual sitting in the seat says, I'll do it for them, or you say, look, I comply with all local law. If I comply with local law, I could put 14-year-old kids to work in my factories. Now, you'd be pissed, because you don't want 14-year-olds making shoes, but the law says it can be done. And so I would like government to get out of this narrow-minded sort of bureaucratic swirl around the drain thing and say, push back and say, okay, let's put real standards in for climate. Let's put in real standards for human rights. And then let's tell the CEO, figure out how to compete or go out of business. That I can live with.
Okay. Let's switch over to consumers for a second. You know, you hear sometimes, well, you know, what does it really matter what I buy? And, you know, voting with my feet or my checkbook or my wallet isn't going to make a difference. I mean, have consumers made a change? I mean, why do we see the current level of activity that we see in businesses around sustainability, around being green? Is that a response to a consumer movement? Can consumers really make a difference?
So the answer stares you right in the face, the answer to the question, because if you look around here and you ask everybody who's a 19-year-old guy to stand up and you lined them up across the room, you would see that consumers have a discerning point of view. In this case, it would be about fashion, right? And so I could tell you, because there's very few skills I get, but I could tell you by looking at their shoes where they're from. Where European wears is different what American wears, different what a consumer from China versus Japan wears. Consumers discriminate on fashion all the time. They say, I don't like that, I do like that. And guys like me spend our entire lives trying to figure out what it is you're going to like, because otherwise we don't get paid. And then what about the jet? What about all this stuff? It just goes away. So, you know, talk about justice. I want to eat. And so consumer has no impact, right? Except look at the range of fashion in this room. Somebody like me is working really hard to come up with that tie that you're wearing because you chose that one. You didn't choose the one the dean's wearing, right? So do consumers have an impact on the brand? No, only every minute of every day. Now, if you choose to limit your impact to, I prefer yellow to blue, that's your choice, that's fine. That's fine. But if you say, I prefer yellow to blue and I want green underneath yellow or blue, green now as an ethic as opposed to a color, you can get what you want, right? You think guys like me are happy that some genius at Federal Express said absolutely positively overnight? It was much better when you could take your time, right? The check is in the mail. You don't get away with that anymore, right? That wasn't driven by, no consumer said, I'd like to be able to email, right? So a brand innovator said, I bet I could get paid by coming up with an innovative technology that would allow people to do this. And so Twitter, so they haven't figured out the economic model of Twitter yet, but do you think they will? Well, if they don't, it'll go out of business and somebody will come up with a better model. Does the consumer have power? Yeah, and I'm disappointed when people say the corporation doesn't listen. There's plenty of corporations don't listen. Most of them are owned by the US government now, which is another travesty, right? So we have General Motors didn't listen. And it took us too long to call the ball on that one, but consumers said, I don't want those cars. And we kept saying, I know, but we like to sell them to you. But I don't want to buy them. I know, but I want to sell them to you. I got to make the quarter. And they say, I hear you need to make the quarter, but your product stinks and I'm not going to buy it. So on what basis do you make the decision that the product stinks? You don't like what a Corvette looks like, or you don't like the fact that I got kids chained to a desk sewing the shoes? I don't, on an intellectual basis, the same question, right? You get to discriminate, and I'm telling you, and you know it's true, consumers discriminate every time they make a purchase. You're just asking the question on what should they discriminate upon. You would have said it in better English, but anyways, that was the point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Good.
You're still awake.
Excellent. We're going to let's take a couple of questions from the audience. You don't even have to use the microphones.
just shout.
Just
Don't say
shout.
anything, but
This
go
is,
ahead and shout.
we're a small group. Who's out there? Susie.
So you just presented the case that consumers can tell you what they want and that they can control the charge. And they want to green, buy every green. But clearly you guys are a progressive company. I know that I read on your website that you're doing a lot of organic cottons and that you're committed to there's a whole lot of organic cotton, but hey, it's not selling. Now you might think this is a great material, maybe it's the alternative to leather you just described as being so nasty, but is there any potential for you to kind of, I don't know, inspire the behavior change and kind of
Definitely.
the consumers what do you think they should be doing?
Definitively, we do it all day long.
So let's recapture that question. You
sorry.
want to rephrase that question? An example of organic cotton, which Timberland is committed to, and you've exceeded your goals in that area, hasn't sold as much to what some of your suppliers as you might have liked, and the question being, can you affect that? Is that fair?
So that's the
Can
right-
you push?
the
Can you
the
push
question's right.
green
You have-
as a company?
I played one half of the equation. You're 100% right. It's nice for me to shift the monkey onto your back and say, I'm not responsible for being an accountable organization, except to the extent that the consumer tells me that it's important. And yet, I gave the contrary example, which was whether it was the invention of email or the Federal Express model. That was a leadership model. That was a model that led consumers. No consumer walking around saying, you know what I really want? I really want something the size of a cigarette case that can play 40,000 songs and sit in my pocket and be able to switch it off. That is not an example of, that is exactly the opposite example.
Yeah.
That's the example of a principle-based, mission-based innovation that yields an incredible pull against consumers. And I absolutely agree with you, real social change where the commerce and justice model renews itself and drives in a generative way has to be a meeting of those two forces. The fact that Walmart is using organic cotton is absolutely a push, right? It's absolutely a push, meaning the consumer says, I want it, and Walmart says, you'll get it. And by the way, I respect the model. I'm not talking about Walmart. I respect the model. Say, listen to your consumer, right? But the reason that Walmart is hearing consumers say, I want organic cotton is because Yvonne Chouinard walked in the door on a Monday at Patagonia and said, it's a private company. I don't want to hear your stories about the quality problems because organic cotton has quality issues in terms of long staple versus short staple, and I don't want to hear problems about supply, and I don't want to hear stories about gross margin. We are now 100% organic cotton. Now, as a confirmed nut job, Yvonne gets to say that. He's the founder of Patagonia, right? When he came to see us, back to the competitors collaborating again, he said, you know, I hate you, you are the worst form of corporate scum. And I'm not making that part up, right? I'll actually tell you that story if you want to hear it. It's very funny. But he said, you should be using organic cotton. Competitor telling another competitor and I said, so tell me what the story is. And he sent me a guy who looked like Willie Nelson from the Organic Exchange. And I'm telling you, all he didn't have was a guitar. And he came in, he sat in the boardroom, he literally, you know, I love it when a guy comes into your boardroom and goes like this. This is a really interesting sales call, and I'm thinking, and by the way, it wasn't like Timberland boots, so it was, if he's going to show off his, okay, great. He says, here's what we got to do. I said, okay. And so they had a conversation with no consumer saying, why isn't it organic cotton? Proof of that, you look everywhere in the cotton world, right? What brands come to mind when you think of cotton? I'm not going to disparage anybody, but there's a lot of very powerful consumer brands, like the guys out of Columbus, whose names I wouldn't mention, that, you know, the Abercrombie and I'm Naked, right? That brand, they sell a lot of cotton to you, right? With naked boys and girls of a certain type, right? It's a brand premise. And organic cotton is not a big part of that model. It isn't. It could be. They're a much higher user of cotton than we are, volume-wise. But their consumer hasn't yet said that that's important. There's where I wish the consumer would say it's important, because Mike Jeffries, the CEO of Abercrombie, has got an incredible ear. He listens for that stuff. Mickey Drexler at J. Crew now, got an incredible ear. I know it. I've spent time with Mickey watching him read consumer complaint letters when he's at the Gap. He knows what's going on. But that's necessary, not sufficient. There has to be somebody like an Yvonne who'll say, I'm going to create the desire for this. I'm going to make the case for this. And if we're not selling organic cotton, it's because we're not doing our job. It's not because consumers don't care. It's because our marketing team is not as good as they should be, or our product team is not as good as they ought to be. So it's not your fault, and it's not as simple to say it's up to the consumer. It's not also okay to say it's just the visionary CEO's responsibility. We got to meet in the middle where I can make a profit and you can find us, and the only way I'm going to make a profit is I got to make somebody go, whoa, I got to have that, right?
We have some questions via Twitter here. This is about corporate social responsibility and kind of greenwashing. There's a lot around espoused values, and here's the pillars of our corporate social responsibility program. But how do you differentiate between what a company says and what a company does? Increasingly, people are getting a little bit cynical about, CSR. Every company has it on their webpage now. Everybody has it on their homepage. We do this, and maybe it's a $50,000 grant to a philanthropy, and that's our CSR program. They're not deep in the supply chain. And I'm not quite sure what the Ethan's in the audience. So Ethan, where were you trying to go with that?
What I was asking with the act versus the spouse values is that how much when you talk about corporate social responsibility, is it about a consumer's perception of you being socially responsible versus actually making sure that you're being socially responsible?
So it's a really good question. We have a mentality in America that says you can't trust the assertion that's being made, and that's why we create Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, because CFOs and CEOs lie, right? They distort the financial results to artificially inflate the stock price, and so we need to police them. We create GRI standards for reporting within CSR so that people can be talking the same language. There's not. I guess as a human being, I'm disappointed for the need for that stuff to be policed, but I'm also not that naive. I think it is important that there be a set of common standards and common language. And so when I talk about our return on invested capital at Timberland, in the financial world, everybody knows what that means. They know it's in the numerator, they know it's in the denominator. When you talk about carbon emissions within your value chain, you can get people, there's a quote from Steve Jobs, who's a marvelous marketer, especially when it comes to things green. A company that has a tremendous track record, very different understanding with consumers. Consumers continue to think Apple's the greenest electronics company going. It isn't. It continues to be perceived that way, but Jobs is quoted in Businessweek this way, saying that there needs to be a real effort to create a standard language so that you can comparison shop, because otherwise you get CEO talking about the green building, right? Our headquarters is carbon neutral, right? 4% of Timberland's carbon footprint has to do with owned and operated company facilities, 4%. And he says in Apple's case it's 3%. Right? To his credit, he's saying out loud, if I show you my headquarters is greener than your headquarters, whether it's true or not, it's not the point, he's saying. Until we have a more comprehensive view of what it is we're trying to measure, you do end up having these wild marketing battles, right? Mark Gunther's an interesting online blog guy, a very, very capable guy in the green space. He just published the 30 greenest brands in America based on a consumer survey, and Clorox, which owns a brand called Green something or other, was the number one green brand in consumers' minds in America. Well, they did just spend $30 million of consumer-facing advertising talking about this Green Works thing. I'm not disparaging Green Works.
Product placement right there in the store.
All that stuff is terrific. It's just, are we talking about the right things? And so the answer is what? The answer is, I think there is absolutely a desperate need for more engagement at the elite end of the conversation. Activists, journalists, academics, there needs to be more scrutiny against this. And by scrutiny, I don't mean let's have a cigarette and talk about greenwashing, because we've missed the point anyways. Until we say what we're going to measure, until we create a consistency of dialogue, it's hard for me to be critical of the next CEO because we haven't agreed what we're going to measure just yet. And so, in our case, we're not smart enough. Right? When you say we've been doing this for 25 years, that bears scrutiny. It clearly isn't occasioned by a marketing insight. It's clearly occasioned by, this is what we believe. Now, it's wonderful coincidence that the world coming to that point of view, and so we can claim a position of not too clever, but pretty authentic. Some of the more recent additions to the dialogue are less authentic, but they're very powerful, right? When Walmart says we're going to use organic cotton, as long as they're using organic cotton, they're going to make more change to the factory, to the farm, than we can do in a series of lifetimes. And so there's a very fine line between the perfect being the enemy of the good. That's the sort of the cynical view of greenwashing. But I think at the heart of your question is, if we don't set up a consistent form of language and measurement, it will be always susceptible to who tells the story better, who's a sexier storyteller. And the problem is, I don't know about you, but I am tired of being lied to. I am tired of hearing healthcare told to me by 10,000 voices, none of whom are telling the truth. And all the end of the day is I can't figure out what the hell they're talking about. And the dean was right. I didn't get accepted anywhere else for business school. That's why I went to Dartmouth. But I'm not the average consumer of information, but I can't sort it out. And so I'm desperate for there to be a form of conversation and sustainability that would be about agreed measures. Timberland put a label on our shoe boxes, a nutrition label. We can't get the industry to adopt it. I don't mean our label. We can't get the industry to agree to put a label on the box.
That says what's in it.
Well, so we decided to make up metrics because we couldn't get anybody to agree. So we say how many hours of child labor, how much renewable energy, how many toxins are involved. We put it on every shoebox. At Nordstrom, I've been at the Nordstrom point of sale, and the guy says, why does his thing have a label and this one doesn't? How do I compare them? And then they have two conclusions. Either Timberland's good guys, or Timberland's probably a lying sack of crap marketing company, right? Because one guy has a label and the other one doesn't, so I can't compare. And the consumer says, I don't have time for this, and I don't want to be lied to.
Can you stick on that for a minute? Because one of the things that you do, most companies only report once a year, sometimes once every 2 years on kind of corporate social responsibility or sustainability reporting or whatever you want to call it. And you're doing that quarterly now.
Yeah.
How many other companies are doing that? And what is the future of sustainability reporting? So those are two different questions, I guess.
So I don't like we have our earnings release coming up on October 29th, which means I get to stay up all night the night before rewriting the script, because the CEO script it's like, ugh, this quarter we had a good quarter. It's just terrible. So I have to put it in Jeffrey talk. So everybody knows, and then the lawyers are on standby from 4 o'clock in the morning on when I'm finished rewriting the script, because they have to read it, because I put it in Jeffrey talk, but then they got to make sure I didn't say anything I wasn't supposed to say. So I go through this wonderful exercise of reporting to Wall Street once a quarter, right? Every 90 days. And so this is my prison cell. I'm the CEO of a publicly traded company, and I'm accountable to do that. And so I feel like a little bit like Martha Stewart in her jail cell, right? If I have to be in jail, I want to decorate it my way. So I did. So I said egocentrically, if you're going to make me talk to Wall Street once a quarter, then I'm going to talk to stakeholders once a quarter. Because actually, in the 25 years I've been reporting to Wall Street, every quarter we talk about the same things. We talk about strategy and results and commerce and justice. I've gotten 10 trillion questions, not one, on justice, never. People, I don't even get a chum against the line. It's terrible. So just like this afternoon, I'm not looking for entertainment, I'm looking for push. I want to get better. And so we have stakeholder conversations every 90 days. In order to have a stakeholder conversation every 90 days, you have to have something to talk about. And so we backed into the idea, what if we reported results to stakeholders? It's actually, it's a beautiful symmetry. It says commerce and justice, not commerce and then justice, not justice, maybe some commerce. It's one model. And so I'm trying to get it I haven't got it yet, but I want to do the Wall Street call in the morning and I want to do the stakeholder call in the afternoon. Because there's an optic to commerce and justice, right? I want to force that into the dialogue. And so it's not hard to do reporting every 90 days. And by the way, nobody cares. Nobody cares. It will, and that's to your point about it is, at a certain point, you act on principle, and you act on a principle, and when you'll never know you're right, you will know you're wrong, right? When you do something that's faith-based, that's how I live my life, right? That's how you live your life, right? You have things that you believe in as a matter of faith. You will act on them until you're proven wrong. And depending what your faith is, you either will accept that it's proven wrong, or you still won't accept that. I have very few things I believe in the external sense of the word, and I believe in this notion of commerce and justice. And so I keep talking like, is there anybody out there? Like the Pink Floyd song. And it's funny, Wall Street says, no, nobody's home. But interesting, we do the stakeholder call, and we get people on the other end of the line, including competitors again, saying, I wish our CEO would do this. And I said, well, get her to do it. And they said, will you talk to our CEO? And so I'm on the phone getting competitors to come to the standard because I believe in an efficient marketplace. So if everyone was reporting every 90 days, just like they do on earnings, it'd be a different discourse. There'd be a common set of facts. There'd be a more rational discourse about it, and people would be able to sort out good from bad from baloney.
Good. We had another question, which was how have Nike and Adidas reacted to industry-wide talks about sustainability and sourcing? So kind of picking up on that a little bit.
It depends on what the issue is. They are followers and they're also leaders. And again, I'm not trying to throw rosebuds at the bad boys from Beaverton, but the manufacture of sneakers involves corrected grain white leather. You're really excited about this, but it's a different kind of leather than the brown shoe boys do. And so when you take, if you look at your shoe, it's actually a really interesting exercise. I would not suggest you do this if you haven't changed your socks, but or unless you're wearing merino wool socks. But if you take your shoe off tonight in the dorm or in the apartment or wherever it is, it's a terrific cocktail conversation. You have to be sober, but you ask us how many parts are in a shoe, and then if you want, don't do this with your shoes because you actually, I get mine at a good price. If you peel the parts apart, you ask how are these stuck together. So if you look at your Nike sneaker, it's got tons of pieces. Now, if you've ever been to a factory where they make shoes, that's somebody's fingers doing something, right? It's a marvelous sort of exposition of what it takes to make something. Most people don't do a lot of making in this world, do a lot of consuming. But Nike found that one of the central experiences of the worker on the line was exposure to the cements, the adhesives that bind pieces together. And I don't know why, I can't answer why. I do know as fact, though, that they saw that the base of the chemicals was a volatile organic compound. It smells like toluene, and it is toluene, and that's a carcinogen. And Nike decided on their own that they would use their strength to say, it doesn't have to be, let's find a neutral base, so water-based adhesives. Nike caused the industry to spend time to develop water-based adhesives. We didn't, it was their idea. And they came to us and said, it won't work for your shoes the way it's formulated because we use different chemicals, but you should put a team to work, and we'll work with you if you want to figure out how to put water-based adhesives into higher oil content leathers, brown leathers. So I absolutely tip my hat because the fact that we use water-based adhesives because Nike showed us the way to do that. That wasn't our idea. Adidas is very Teutonic in the sense they're very crisp, they're very execution-oriented, they are the second guy on everything. But by the way, they're the quick second. I respect them for that. They're just not the source of innovation.
Yeah.
Nike has been.
Good entry. All right. We had another question right in the middle. Yes.
I would say a lot of people argue that consumerism is an unsustainable activity altogether. And I'd like to know how you address the idea that Americans are really materialistic, and even if you offer a sustainable product, how do you justify marketing shoes to someone who already owns maybe 3 or 4, 5, 10, 20 pairs of shoes that are perfectly functional?
I don't think consumerism I don't think consumerism is a bad thing. I think consumerism can be a bad thing. I think that hyperconsumption and irresponsible consumption is different than consumption per se. Consumption is a neutral word to me as a starting place. I operate inside a system of free market that's created opportunities for me and for my family and for generations of others in democracies, engaged democracies all around the world. I'm a believer in the marketplace. I'm not a believer in the untrammeled marketplace. I don't believe that in laissez-faire, literally the French, let them do what they want. I don't believe in that. I do believe that there needs to be tension, real tension in the civic square, even around the notion of consumption, how things are made and how things are consumed. And I believe that the generative power of the marketplace, which is based on consumption, based on me selling a good or service to you and making a rent on the capital lent to me by a shareholder, is a model that can be, that it's not benign, neither does it need to be malignant. It can be constructive. Not perfect, but constructive. And I'll tell you at the heart, I've been asked this question before. I got asked by a faith leader in the UK. He said to me, I don't believe that the marketplace is an inherently fair notion. Right? It creates class, it creates distinction, rich, poor, yes, no. And I said back to him with deep respect, I acknowledge the point. I can't conceive, like Otto Wittgenstein, the limit of rational thought. I don't have a better model in my head, right? The alternative models that are posed to me in terms of a free marketplace, I look at what's happened historically, and I see those as utterly failed models. And so I don't argue this one's perfect. I don't argue that this one doesn't need a tremendous amount of energy and engagement to optimize. And I also concede in advance, optimization doesn't mean transcendence. It's not going to be perfect. There's pain and loss in the ecosystem of the free marketplace. But I don't know a better model. I don't. I don't say I reject the notion that one could exist. I just don't know how to describe one. And so in the meantime, I operate within that marketplace, and I think to myself, I have an accountability to chase the taillights. It's an asymptotic argument. I absolutely accept your point. I don't think that that the free market is the path to transcendence. I don't know that it is. I just don't know a better path.
Okay.
Do you have one? No, I don't mean, I meant like, what should I be thinking about differently?
Well, specifically, I'm just thinking about, I'm sure you're familiar with Tom's Shoes.
Sure.
It's an organization where you buy a pair of shoes and then they give one pair of shoes to a child in need that doesn't have shoes. So I think that kind of brings the point across to people that you don't necessarily need more than one pair of shoes. And you're at the same time helping someone else. So I agree with you that, I mean, there are a lot of problems with the current market, but I was just wondering how you felt about marketing your products to someone that already has a lot of maybe your products.
Two things. Let me go to Tom's model, which I respect enormously. Ask yourself the question, why doesn't every shoe company on earth do that? Why don't I give a pair of shoes away for every pair I sell? Now, you could say, well, if Tom's is a charity, that's a different model. But it's not. It's a for-profit company. And so you got to ask yourself, and I'm not being critical, neither of you, certainly not of them, that you got to look at the way the shoe is constructed and see the price at which they're selling the pair that they're selling, and realize that they've built into the gross margin of that pair that they're selling to you the means to be able to fund the very wonderful thing they're doing, the giving one away part. And so to me, that's the proof of the point I was arguing to you, which is there's an innovative CEO who's using the marketplace model. He is earning a profit. He's doing good as he earns a profit. To me, that's the commerce and justice model. You say, if people have 6 pairs, the Imelda thing, right? There's a flood in the Philippines, and only the American media, People magazine will pick up the fact that they sent a commando team in to rescue the shrine to Imelda's shoes. I mean, that's just beautiful, right? That was the story they want to talk about. So I have 7, 8 pairs of shoes at home for the different parts of my life. Technical hiking boots, the running shoes, and then it's time to get styled for BU shoes, right? So I don't need 7 or 8 pairs of shoes. My grandfather didn't have 7 or 8 pairs of shoes. I've convinced myself it's convenient to have 7 or 8 pairs of shoes, and now the question is, how can I do that in a way that is not fundamentally disgusting, right? And so how does Timberland build a marketing model on that? Well, the boot that I'm wearing today is the design for disassembly boot. The design for disassembly boot is a boot that we engineered the daylights out of. It took us a long time to do it, to figure out how, because the biggest problem with shoes is they're monstrous hybrids. You glue them together, you stitch them together. What do you do with them? You're done. You can downcycle them. You can give them to somebody to wear worn, but when they're finished being worn, what do you do with them? They go in a landfill. And they're full of, it's a mixed media that you can't recycle, you can't incinerate, you can't gasify. So we worked hard to design a system. I'm taking it off again. You can't see it, but there's a tiny little channel stitch there. If I had my knife, I'd do this, but then I'd be 1 foot down. You pop it right here, the stitch comes out and the sole comes off. Then you have an upper. There's one eyelet, but it's got a screw on the back of it, so you can take the eyelet off. The others are blind eyelets. This used to be a pop bottle. So this is a recycled PET. That's it. There's only 5 materials in the whole shoe. This sole used to be a car tire. Now, a lot of people in the shoe industry take car tires and cut them up and put them on the bottom of the shoe. It's a really bad idea because car tires are very toxic. There's a Malaysian scientist whose father, no, he's dead, the scientist. The son is running the company. The father came up with a way to delink carbon bonds in an automobile tire. So car tire from landfill plus magic sauce, it delinks and you can infinitely recycle, almost with no loss. And so this performs like virgin rubber. It's called green rubber. See the little green thing? That's wicked cool marketing, right? And so when you're finished with this consumption experience, it doesn't have to be for a landfill. Now, that beats the crap out of the standard industry, and you and I can agree that that's okay. It's not great, it's okay, because it is leather, right? And it's another pair of shoes that fundamentally, you're right, no one has to have. Nobody buys Timberland, except for our industrial division. Nobody buys Timberland because they have to. They buy Timberland because they want to. Our business is based on selling things to people that they don't have to have in order to make a profit. And then we do everything else to try and make that feel less bad.
We're going to take a few more questions before we have to go. Pauline.
So it seems like a lot of companies are hiring sustainability managers and have water waste reduction efforts and so forth. It seems like sustainability is becoming more commoditized, if I can use that word. Mm-hmm. So looking forward, what do you think are ways that companies can set themselves apart in terms of this work?
Wow. I think we're working on the idea of ultimate accountability for a product, because that's where the fundamental carbon emission conversation starts and ends. And so you can have a conversation with Timberland design team about when it's done, add water and a tree grows. I mean, we spent 4 hours yesterday talking about, it's one thing to disassemble it, but you're left with leather, which you can rework, but you can't recycle, right? And so ultimately, I think the ashes to ashes conversation is the one that will be a point of distinction in our industry, right? If you start with a pure ingredient and you end up with a natural outcome, that will be the least toxic ride that the product can take. It's not immaculate. There's a whole series of issues that still attend to that, right? North Face, who are good guys, just got in a lot of trouble for the EPA. Our government has time to sue North Face about claiming that they're using bamboo as an insert, and they said it's anti-odor, and the EPA says that makes it a pesticide, and so they're suing them. We can't get climate change legislation, but the EPA's got time to go after North Face about using bamboo processed in their shoes, which is utterly ridiculous. But they're trying, and yet the point is, at the heart of it, EPA is right, meaning it started out as bamboo, and they processed it so much it ended up not being bamboo anymore. I get it, right? But it's the classic perfect is the enemy of the good argument again. What does a consumer want? It's hard to figure out. The woman behind you asked the question, when it's charted ground, when everybody knows that what you got to do is make a blue hat with that lettering on it at the lowest price and the best fit, that's easier to do. It's really clear, that's what he wants. It's when it's less clear, what does the consumer demand in terms of an accountable for-profit enterprise? What's your expectation? Could you describe? Yeah, most of the time when I ask that question, you get the Greenpeace answer. Yes, I want you to vanish from the earth. Really, you get a capitalism is a fundamentally evil notion, consumerism is bad, go away. But that I can't help. I can't play against that standard because that's not in my best interest as I can figure it out. It doesn't fit with me. But if you ask the consumer, lead me, show me where you want us to go from this perspective, very hard to have a conversation. Meaning, not because they're not willing to try, just because people are very conditioned in the context of what's possible. And so it comes back to lots of lonely conversations in as broad a network as you can, which is why I wanted to come here today. Right? Not literally because somebody will say something and you think, I didn't think of that. And that's how you'll end up with a vision that is more than a vision, that can be concrete and acted on.
And Jeff, what advice would you give people in the audience today who want to be part of this conversation in their personal or professional life, and they're not all business students? We've got international relations or communications or, liberal arts. I mean, if you want to continue to be part of this conversation and continue to impact the world, whether as a consumer or professionally, what skills do you need, and where can you have the biggest influence? What advice would you give?
I think people forget the power of the individual citizen to make a difference. Robin would laugh because I'm learning how to do Twitter these days. I got ripped thumbs. I go on my BlackBerry and I can do Twitter now. And so last night at like 1 o'clock in the morning, I was checking it out, right? And there's some guy, you search Timberland and up came this thing in Spanish. My kids were asleep and it wasn't like schoolboy Spanish, it was clearly colloquial Spanish. And I thought, I'm not sure exactly what that means, so on my own, I clipped it and pasted it into something on Google, and I pushed a button, and I got a really bad translation, but the really bad translation said, your jacket sucks. That's what it translated to. And I thought, whoa. And so I said a Twitter thing back to this guy. Now, my thing in transparency mode is Timberland_Jeff. And when you hit on it, it says the CEO of Timberland, like, okay, that's who I am, right? It's because I'm not hiding, I'm just telling you the truth. I talked to my friend who's the founder of Whole Foods, like, why'd you use a nickname when you were sending all those weird things in your Whole Foods posting? Anyways, he said, yeah, I wouldn't do that a second time. So anyways, so I didn't do that. Mine says Timberland Jeff. And so the guy from Venezuela, he's from Venezuela, this guy, writes back and says to me, and thank God his English is better than my Spanish, like the first thing he wants to know is this really you? That is a hell of a question, by the way. He doesn't say, is this the CEO of Timberland? He writes, is this really you?
Jeff.
No, not Jeff. And I'm looking at thinking, is this really me? I don't know. I've been spending 49 years trying to find out who is really me. Jesus, that's a hell of a question for 1 o'clock in the morning. We're talking about jacket quality. So, all right, I wrote back, I think so. And so the guy, I'm doing the best I can. Ask my wife. So I write back, and he says, I'm surprised. And I said, but I got kids that I want to feed. I got 5,000 men and women at Timberland counting on me to not let you be disappointed if your jacket didn't work. And so by the time the telephone chain, the email chain thing worked out, I got people all over the globe taking care of this dude's jacket. And it's done by the end of the day today. And I thought to myself, wow, actually it was a really hopeful thing. Because all he is, I don't even know who he is. I'll never meet this guy. He wrote like 128 characters, I counted them, that said your jacket stinks. And the consequence of your jacket stinks in 128 characters in a flattened universe is that you have an opportunity. So at Twitter they call it followers. He's now signed up to be a follower of my posts, but he's nobody's follower. In this case, I was working for him, right? I'm being accountable to him because there's an accountability mechanism. I'm not going to get the Nobel Prize for it, but if I fail to follow up on it, I will go out of business. That's a good model. And so I think people just need to remember, check your heart, inflate your lungs. Don't scream, do speak. What you have to say can be heard. If you choose not to say it, that's on your dime.
Good advice. Jenna, how much more time do we have? Okay, we're going to take a couple of questions, yeah.
I am very interested in the conversation that you want to begin or to engage people in commerce and justice. And it sounds like you're not finding that in the usual mechanisms that we think of in Wall Street, audits, SOX. But now we have government-owned enterprises, and commerce and justice are also concepts very entrenched in our government. So can't that be consistent? Is there room for the government actions to promote sustainability or to promote good business practices? Is that necessarily inconsistent with the power of consumers?
No. If I've made myself unclear about how desperately we need, in my opinion, how desperately we need real leadership from government, then I want to make sure I do the best I can to be clear about that. It's when any sector of civic society says I am the answer, I think instinctively you're wrong. Because I think only through collaborative models of problem solving are we going to attack the three-dimensional problems. We've worked with City Year for 25 years. We can go into schools in Boston, we can go into charter schools, we can go into non-charter schools, and we can influence the academic outcome the student has. I've worked with Share Strength for 20 years. My friend Billy Shore is the founder of this organization. We can make sure the school lunch is nutritious. So I get you a nutritious school lunch, I can get you an after-school program that works. I can't keep the child safe on the walk home if I don't have a program to keep the child safe home. When the child gets home and mom and dad don't have a job, it turns out that all the programmatic work I did is good, but it's not good enough, right? And so you can't treat the symptoms. You have to have a three-dimensional solution. So Jeff Canada in the Harlem Children's Zone says, in 3 dimensions, every issue, the government, the church, the NGO, the activist, the business person, they have to be cobbled together to create sustainable change. All I'm desperate for is the government to be less talk and more leadership. I'm desperate for the government to do what it should do, which is set social policy and then call on the marketplace to innovate against that. The conversation about should we have climate rules is the wrong question. That is not a question that I should have an opinion on except as a citizen. I vote for the government, right? And so I think government should absolutely not set climate rules. Terrific. Count the votes. It turns out that the majority of the engaged citizens think the government should have something to say about that. So say it. Say it. Stop. I went to the White House. I got invited to the White House recently to have a conversation about this. I looked around this table. There was 10 CEOs, 4 power company CEOs, Jeff Hollander from 7th Generation, and me. And I'm sitting in the thing in this beautiful room in the White House. Wicked cool room. And this chandelier like nobody's business. And this woman who's an incredibly powerful person in the administration. And they're all sitting around and they're having a conversation about we need new. He said, I'll support the Markey bill, but we need you to support nuclear power. And I'm watching this like at the US Open, watching the balls go back and forth, thinking, I should have stayed home. But I'm just watching the ball go back and forth. And finally, I get glazed over and I look back up and I'm staring at the chandelier. And you know what kind of light bulbs they have in that chandelier? They have these halogen I thought maybe I'm sweating because I'm nervous. I'm not sweating because I'm nervous. There's no global warming. There's freaking local warming in this room. It's so warm. And I thought to myself, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to the men's room. Okay, that's my answer to everything. So I go to the men's room, and I'm telling you, I don't mean to be graphic, but you hit the men's urinal, the Potomac goes down 2 inches. They're not low flush toilets. You go to Howard Schultz's headquarters at Starbucks, where he says I'm concerned about water usage, go into the men's room. I cannot talk about the women's room, but you go into the men's room, he's got low flush toilets. He's not talking, he's actually doing. And there's a flat screen TV in the men's room of the old executive office building. We're sitting in the room beating our gums talking about a deal. Should it be 17% reduction in carbon or 14%? Look, today, by coincidence, we released a report that said, compared to the 2006 baseline, Timberland last year reduced our carbon emissions 27%. A for-profit company, there's no legislation that says do it. There's no standard. It exceeds what Kyoto would have asked for, exceeds what Copenhagen will ask for. And by the way, we did it and made money doing it. And so I want the government to say, I don't care what they pick. That's the legislative process. That's their job. Pick a number, pass a law, and call on the marketplace to respond. And instead, there's this incredible battle. No leadership, incredible battle of special interests, and we're still talking about it. So in the meantime, I'm back to your question, which is, by the time they freaking figure out, pardon my language, by the time they decide what to do, my kids will be paying the bill for this. And so I'm in the mode of, we're going to do something about it in the meantime. That doesn't mean I think business should lead. I think government should lead. But all I hear is blah, blah, blah.
I hear you, and it sounds like you need something definitive to plan a manufacturing process for. Is that it? And
no, in our case, we don't. In our case, we take the view, it will sound cynical. I want it to sound skeptical. In my view, I take the view, by the time this inexact science of legislative discussion resolves, it will be too late. And so I've taken the view, in the absence of a standard, I've done what a good CEO would do. I interpolated data. I talked to 10 smart people from different points of view and picked a number, because that's how most goal setting works, at least in our corporation. So if Kyoto called for a 15% reduction over 3,000 years, I said, let's pick 25%. And now, I mean, it was literally as random as that. Now, as soon as you finish picking the number, you walk out and you say, put in a memo, right? And you say to Timberland people, we've resolved after much debate and consideration, we're setting a stretch goal of 25%. Nobody at Timberland cares where the number comes from. They care about the number. Back to the measurement conversation. As soon as you put a number down, it's, okay, we got to get 25. That's our goal. And so Timberland's dancing around like the Nike guys in the end zone, because last year we didn't get a 25% reduction in carbon, we got a 27% reduction. All I'm thinking is I should have set the goal at 30, right? Because I picked the wrong number. And that's really, I know I sound stupid, I don't mean to. If the government would pick a number and step back, which is exactly what government should do, they should set social policy. I hear all these businessmen saying it's going to put us out of business. U.S. Chamber of Commerce saying it's an enormous tax. Okay, it's an enormous tax. Next issue. So is the minimum wage. I don't want to pay the minimum wage. I don't. I would much rather not pay the minimum wage. And so if you want to change social policy, I won't pay the minimum wage. Actually, right, I will, but that's my problem, right? That's my problem. But when the government said you'll pay a minimum wage, everybody said the same thing. It's going to put American business out of business. It didn't. Trillions of dollars of value were created because some genius, smarter than me, CEO said, I got to figure out how to make a buck with a minimum wage. If you say, we're going to put the price of carbon into the system. And by the way, cap and trade's the wrong way to do it, in my humble opinion. It should be a straightforward, let me tell you the truth, tax on carbon. Much more efficient, takes away all the bureaucratic wheeling and dealing and trading credits and all that crap. Just put the price in the system. And by the way, if I don't figure it out, I won't get invited back to the chair. I'll be unemployed. That's okay. That's the free market. Play. Government should lead. I'm desperate for them to lead. They have no excuse not to, and it's not a partisan point. They haven't led in 100 years on this point.
Good. Last audience question. Ooh, this gentleman right here in the front.
Hello.
Hey.
I find your company very commendable, and I went online and looked up the nutrition label, and I
Hold that
saw.
mic a little closer.
Oh, sorry. I looked up your nutrition label today, and I found it amazing how much you guys are doing, especially with the boots, which is the first product that comes to mind from your company. So I really liked how 75% of the boots is PVC usage as a substitute to plastic, and 100% of the box is recycled paper. So the only thing I was a little concerned about was that only 6.6%, I guess, of the manufacturing of the shoes is renewable energy. And I read on the website that by 2015 you plan to have carbon neutral or like solar and wind panel alternative energy. So I was just a little concerned, like how are you planning to do that with such a small percentage already used for the boots?
That's such a cool question, because we say on the nutrition label that's, I think the label says now 5%, but when it gets updated, it'll say we're up to 6.6% of all the energy used in the manufactured Timberland products is from locally sourced renewable energy sites. And that's a really cool statistic, except anybody in the business school knows that you have to have a comparative point of data. You can't plot a line, right? It takes 2 points to plot a line. So what percentage of Nike's production is based on renewable energy? Well, they may know the answer, but they're not talking about it, and so a consumer can't compare 6%. So in fact, our general counsel told me I was going to go to jail. And she said, you're going to go to jail and you're stupid for putting out this label. And that's a lawyer. She worries about the jail part first and not the stupid part. I said, what's the jail part? She said, you're asserting a standard to consumers that hasn't been verified by the government. I was okay. And I said, what's the stupid part? She said, you're going to tell people we're only 5% of the energy used to make our products is renewable. I said, but that compares so favorably to anybody in our space. She said, but the consumer isn't going to know that. They're going to see this little number and they're going to think you stink. And I thought, it was a good point, but it was already too late because we'd already put the labels on. I didn't tell her that. Like, where were you when I needed you, lady? But anyways, she's little, but she's very tough, this one. I love the fact that you're disappointed that it's 6.6%. Because that gives me hope against the question that was asked before, which is, does the consumer care? Mm-hmm. Like, if the consumer doesn't know to have a conversation about renewable energy as part of production, then no, they can't care. But somebody says it's 6.6, somebody says, well, I can do that, I can do 8%, or I can do 10%, all of a sudden I got me a problem. Your second question was, how are we going to be carbon neutral? Carbon neutral is a tough one. Now the general counsel is involved, right? Because carbon neutral means what? In company-owned and operated facilities. Now, in company-owned and operated facilities and employee travel, we measure our carbon emissions, we report our carbon emissions, we use reduce, recycle. We're going to buy the system from Cisco so that we don't have to travel anymore. The telepresence thing, it's unbelievable. We're going to stop traveling. Terrific. We will get to carbon neutral, I'm very confident, against the deadline that was argued. We are doing some offsets. I hate it, I'll tell you the truth. I'm making the offset conversation be connected to the business system. So in Danville, Kentucky, the heart of soft coal, we have a distribution center. And so we invested offset money in helping create a hydro energy system. We didn't create it, they did. We funded it, though. We committed 5 years of contract money to buy the electricity. So we're paying a higher rate, but we're getting clean energy. Even in the heart of coal, it makes it easy for me to call the senators from Kentucky and help lobby for the climate bill, which I do. They don't take my call. It's great fun, though. And so it's not a perfect science, but the net is we'll get to carbon neutral, but that's 4% of our carbon footprint. Energy, carbon that relates to the facilities that we own and operate, employee travel is 4% of our footprint. The cow in the field, I don't have a clue how to get carbon neutral about. I don't. I can tell you that in the last 2 years, Timberland employees have dug holes and planted 400,000 trees around the world. Now, we don't get any credit in carbon terms for that because there's Sarbanes-Oxley is interesting, so is tree Oxley, whatever the hell that is. The tree has to be verified and loved and applauded. Otherwise, and you have to, by the way, we're going to plant 1 million trees a year in Haiti with Wyclef Jean, who's a Haitian activist. He's a spectacular guy. We're planting 1 million trees starting this May in Haiti. Consumers, social justice folks, incredible coalition. We're not going to get any credit for it from a carbon perspective. And so, but I'm back in the CEO mode of like, they don't have to give me credit. I know that we're taking carbon out of the atmosphere when we do this. Someday the science will catch up to it and we'll get credit for it. And then maybe that'll be a way to talk about being more carbon neutral in the whole supply chain. In the meantime, we are, in Bruce Springsteen terms, halfway to heaven, but just a mile out of hell when it comes to carbon management.
I'm going to ask you to make some closing comments, and by doing that, I'm going to, a couple of times in this conversation, you've mentioned your faith, and I'm wondering, how does your faith kind of influence and motivate you, and kind of what keeps you going, and I'm going to let you end on that.
That's a hard one. My faith. I don't usually talk in religious terms in a broad world, but I would say this. Somebody smart on our board once said to me about issues of principle, which is how we try to operate the business. He said, it's all about the question, it's not about the answers. If you have the right questions, you'll figure out what to do. If you don't have the right question, you can really get lost, right? So if you think the question is, like Jeopardy, right? You always you got to ask a question. So if the question is, how do I maximize returns to shareholders? If that's the question you're operating against, it's going to lead to behaviors, and it's going to take you in a direction. If the question is, how do I conduct my business affairs faithfully? That's a different question that leads you in a different place. And so in the Babylonian Talmud, which is a compendium of thought and argument that dates from a long time ago, it's reported, and I'm embarrassed a second, I can't think of the name of whom it's reported in, but when you're called to account, right, the equivalent of your earnings release, right, but when you're called to account after you are no longer alive, the first question everybody's going to be asked is, did you conduct your business affairs with emunah? Emunah means faith, right? Did you conduct your affairs with faith? Which is a spectacular question, right? To me. Mm-hmm. To me, it's a spectacular question that stares me in the face all the time. And I know that my answer will be inadequate, no matter how hard I try. But the question to me is a perpetual motivation. And you're right, sometimes consumers get it, and sometimes consumers respond to it instantly, but there will be no consumer to defend me when it's time to answer that question. There will be no shareholder who will protect me from the track record of my choices. I am accountable for those choices now. And like I said, I'm very leery of using religious language in a broad and engaged conversation at Timberland or otherwise, because I don't want particularism to create unnecessary fractions between people. But you ask a direct question. To me, I don't seek to escape from that accountability. I actually run towards it. And while I'm inadequate against that standard, that's what drives me.
It's a wonderful note to end on, and I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you very much for coming in.